Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Garou, Mark of the Wolves for the Sega Dreamcast, otherwise known as Fatal Fury Mark of the Wolves. It was developed and published by SNK, released into arcades in 1999, for the Dreamcast in 2001, and it's also available for the Neo Geo AES and the PlayStation 2. It's the last game to be released as part of the Fatal Fury series, and it's set a number of years after the end of the previous game, with the only returning character being Terry Bogard, though there are a number of other characters that have ties to previous ones, such as the Sons of Kim Kap-wan, a student of Kyoku Karate, a member of the Shiranui Ninja Clan, and my personal favorite new character, Rock Howard, son of series villain Geese Howard, who plays like a mix between Geese and Terry. Mark of the Wolves, for the most part, doesn't really have a lot of standout features. It just plays really well. It's actually one of my favorite SNK fighters. You have the standard 4-button setup, and each of the 14 selectable characters has an array of special moves and super combos. The super combo meter actually fills up twice. You can perform an attack when it reaches S power, but if you can hold out until it reaches P power, you can perform a significantly more powerful attack. Mark of the Wolves also uses what's referred to as the top system. When you choose your character, you can assign a certain area of your health bar to be the top section, and when your health is in that area, you'll enter a powered up state as long as it stays there. This is a pretty cool feature, but not one that I feel adds that much to the gameplay, which was already awesome anyway. There are 4 gameplay modes to choose from, and there's even a gallery included. On the whole, this is just a solid fighter with some really tight controls and very fun gameplay.
Are you okay? Fast!
KO!
Okay!
Mark of the Wolves sports some pretty nice graphics. The characters all have great designs, some being very reminiscent of past characters, and some being completely unique as far as this series is concerned. The stages all look really nice too. They're very colorful, and there's a lot of detail in the backgrounds as well. Very nice looking game. The sound design, on the other hand, I find to be a little weak. The soundtrack, aside from a couple of tunes, is pretty flat and forgettable. It just sort of does its job and not much more, which is a trend I noticed with later SNK games like this. Their soundtracks typically aren't on par with what they were doing in the early 90s. Still, this is a really well-made game with great graphics and gameplay, just not a stellar soundtrack, which didn't stop me from enjoying it immensely. So, this is a fantastic fighting game, and one I highly recommend to fans of the genre, especially if you've played and enjoyed past Fatal Fury titles. Looking online, the Japanese version of this game is usually between $30 and $40, while the US version goes for closer to $70 or $80. The cheapest option is actually the PS2 version, which goes for under $30 on average. Regardless of which system you're playing it for, though, you're gonna be getting a good game. It's Garou, Mark of the Wolves, and it's pretty awesome. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Kamen Rider Climax Heroes for the PlayStation 2. This game was developed by Aiding and published by Bandai Namco, in Japan only, in 2009. It's the first game in a series that also has releases on the Wii and PSP, only one of which actually got an international release. It's obviously based on the Kamen Rider TV show, and features 10 different iterations of the titular character, each taken from a different series, and for that reason it'll probably be really appealing to fans of Kamen Rider, such as myself. This is a one-on-one fighter that focuses more on flash than actual gameplay, though the gameplay itself still isn't bad. The controls are really simple. You have a light and heavy attack that can both be chained into combos, as well as a special attack button and a super attack button that drains a bit off your super combo meter, which you can refill by either landing attacks or by charging it up, which leaves you briefly vulnerable. Once the super combo meter is full, you have a couple of options for how to use it. For one, you can morph into a stronger form with most characters, or slow down time with others, which allows you to pretty much land as many attacks as you want within a limited period of time. Your other option is the more obvious one. You can perform your character's signature super attack, which results in a short cinematic sequence and always ends with an explosion, which is in keeping with the TV series.
Start up. 行くぜ。見てろよ。3、2、1。I'm out。嘘だ。戦が負けるなんて。
There are a handful of gameplay modes to choose from. You have the standard arcade and survival modes, but you also get the Decade mode to play through, where you take control of Kamen Rider Decade and fight through all of the others, earning the ability to transform into each one and take all of their special moves on the fly, which is pretty cool. Also, by playing through this mode, you earn TV stills and Kamen Rider trading cards to view in the gallery mode. Overall, the gameplay in Climax Heroes is really simple, but also fun. It's pretty mindless as far as fighting games go. You'll probably be doing a lot of button mashing, but you'll also be having a good time, which is what's most important. The visuals, I think, are kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, the characters themselves look great. They're very detailed and represent the source material really well. And all of the special attacks, transformations, and super attacks look really cool. They pretty much make the game, but the stages are really bland and lack detail for the most part. On the whole, I think it's a good looking game though. The sound design is pretty good too. The music is Kamen Rider appropriate. You'll enjoy it while you're playing, but forget it soon after. There is a lot of voice work from the various actors who played each version of Kamen Rider, which is really cool, and the sound effects are lifted directly from the show as well. This is a game that sells itself more on its presentation than its gameplay, and for what it's worth, it's pretty good.
Rider kick. Rider kick.
So this is a pretty fun game, and one Kamen Rider fans will definitely want to get their hands on. If you're not a fan of the series, then you probably won't appreciate it as much, but I think you'd enjoy it regardless. And good news, this and other games in the Climax Heroes series can be found all over eBay for really reasonable prices, usually between $10 and $20. So if you're looking for a simple, fun, and flashy 3D fighter that's packed to the brim with explosions, ridiculous weapons, and lots of elaborate headgear, then get yourself a copy of Kamen Rider Climax Heroes. 'Hey soccer fans, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Captain Tsubasa for the Famicom. This game was developed and published by Tecmo and was released in Japan in 1988. It was eventually released in North America and Europe in 1992 as Tecmo Cup Soccer and Tecmo Cup Football respectively, but a number of changes were implemented, such as altering the appearance of the characters and changing the music as well. Captain Tsubasa is obviously a series of manga and anime about a soccer team, and in particular the team's captain, soccer genius Tsubasa Ozora. It's a high-action, low-scoring extravaganza. So this is a sports game, but very unlike the other soccer games on the system. You could best describe it as a cinematic sports game. Essentially, whenever you have control of the ball, you run up the field, and when you're ready, you can choose to pass or shoot the ball, giving your opponent the chance to block or steal. Or if they converge on you, you're forced to choose between passing, shooting, and dribbling. And likewise, when you're on the defense, you have a number of techniques you can use to steal the ball or block passes. And when your opponent takes a shot, you have control over your goalie and the option to punch, catch, or otherwise just block the ball. Before each match and during halftime, you have the chance to get advice on how to beat your opponents and check the stats of your players. That's really about it. It's definitely an interesting take on the sports genre, but also feels pretty random sometimes. Once you pass or shoot the ball, it's really out of your hands. It may or may not be blocked, and you don't have any control beyond choosing which teammate you're going to pass to. Even when shooting, you can't control the angle of your shot, but it sometimes bounces off the edge of the goal somehow anyway. It's kind of frustrating actually, but again, it's different and fun. If you're already not a sports game fan though, I doubt this one's going to change your mind. I think the real draw of this game, aside from the odd gameplay style, is the presentation. It doesn't really look like a lot of other 8-bit games. Again, it's meant to be a more cinematic experience. Running up the field, the ball flying through the air, the goalie diving for the ball. It's all meant to look very dramatic and cool, just like the anime, and I think it accomplishes that. I'm personally not a soccer fan, but this game does make it look pretty action-packed, and aside from that, it is a fairly colorful, detailed, and all-around good-looking game, which Tecmo was very good at making 8-bit cinematic experiences. They also made some great 8-bit music too, and this game is no exception. Lots of high-energy music to really get you in that team spirit. Some of it actually being adapted from the anime series, which is pretty cool. Overall, a really good-looking and sounding game. Typical 8-bit Tecmo quality. So this is a pretty fun game and really unique among its peers. I'd recommend it to soccer fans wholeheartedly. The North American version goes online usually for $60 or more, 30 or more for the PAL version, but the Famicom version can be found for under $10 typically, which again illustrates the perks of switching to imports. There are also a ton of sequels released for the Famicom, Super Famicom, and a few other systems that also feature the same style gameplay. If you're looking for an 8-bit, anime-based, cinematic-style soccer drama action fest, then Tecmo has got you covered. It's Captain Tsubasa, and it's pretty cool. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at what might just be my new favorite sports game, Flying Power Disc for the Geo CD, also known as Windjammers in the West. This game was developed by Data East and released in arcades in 1994 and on consoles in 1995. It's set in the future, presumably everybody wears really future-y looking clothes, and apparently Frisbee has taken the world by storm. But not just any Frisbee, it's a Frisbee tennis hybrid sport that can only be played by the world's greatest and most stereotypical athletes. Are you getting tired of froth? Well then, this is the sport for you. Flying Power Disc features a really simple and really fun gameplay style. Think of it as kind of an advanced form of Pong. Both competitors stand at either side of the court and throw the disc back and forth, trying to get it in the other player's net. The net itself is two different colors, and getting the disc in the yellow area gets you 3 points, and the red area gets you 5. When you're holding the disc, the A button throws it, and when you're not holding it, the A button allows you to perform a quick dash. And by throwing the disc against the walls, it ricochets in the opposite direction. The faster you throw the disc after catching it, the more powerful the throw will be. But you can't hold on to it forever, as you will be forced to throw it automatically after a short while. By pressing the B button, you can lob the disc to your opponent's side, and if it hits the ground, you get 2 points. But this also gives them the chance to perform a powerful special throw, which is hard to defend against. Each court is a different size, with differently arranged nets, and some of them even have additional barriers. You have 8 characters to choose from, and they all have varying stats and different power throws. That's about it. You can pretty much play this game with just one button, but it turns out to be really fast-paced, intense, and insanely fun. I love it. There's even some fun mini-games thrown in for good measure, playing catch with your dog, and even a little disc bowling. Overall, I found the gameplay in Flying Power Disc to be outstanding. The visuals, a lot like the gameplay, are pretty simple, but I still think they're really nice. This game features a lot of color and some nice detail in the courts. And better yet, you'll never experience any slowdown, and the load times weren't that bad either. I like the character designs. Each character represents a different country, and thankfully they're all voiced, so we get plenty of excellent one-liners in a bunch of different languages, which is excellent. These characters actually kind of make me think of the American Gladiators to a certain extent. The music is also good. I don't think I'll be humming it anytime soon, but it really matches the action. It's upbeat and fast-paced, and I like it. So overall, Flying Power Disc has some colorful visuals and decent sound design to match its ultra-fun gameplay. I can easily recommend this game to pretty much anyone. Even if you're not a sports fan, it's not really a sports game. It's just Flying Power Disc. It's awesome. Unfortunately, it's not exactly a cheap game. The CD version can go for $70 up to $100, which is a bummer, but not nearly as bad as the $700 being asked for the AES version. At that rate, a ROM is really the only option for those of us that aren't loaded. Whatever way you can, though, definitely go out of your way to play Flying Power Disc, aka Windjammers, aka Frennis. Yes, I made that last one up.
Way to go!
Well done. Next round.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the very cool Ougon Musokyoku X for the Xbox 360. It was developed by 7th Expansion, published by Alchemist, and interestingly enough, it was originally released as a self-published PC game at Kamen in 2010, and this 360 version was released a year later. It's actually a spin-off game to a series of murder mystery visual novels. It takes place on Rokkenjima Island, where a mysterious series of murders and disappearances have taken place. Is this the work of mysticism, or is there a psychopath on the loose? Or maybe it's both. The story changes a bit depending on which characters you choose, and obviously everyone has their own unique ending. Ougon Musokyoku X is a 2D tag fighting game and plays a lot like some other modern 2D fighters. Arc System Works, for example, comes to mind. It's very fast-paced and fun with some really tight controls and plenty of opportunity to pull off some insane combos. Tagging in and out can be added into combos as well, and each of the game's 13 playable characters has a unique special ability that only they can use, on top of a long list of special moves and super combos. And speaking of, that's something that this game does a little differently. As you fight, instead of building up your own super combo gauge, you build up your partners. So if you're playing really well, they'll have a full stock of super combos when you tag them in. Another cool feature is the Meta World. Essentially, you can change the look of the stage and enter into a powered-up state at the cost of one super combo, and while in the meta world, you can perform your character's meta super attack, which does a ton of damage and looks awesome. Bear in mind though that your opponent can cancel out your meta world by activating their own. This game really does feel like an amalgamation of features from some other really good fighting games like Guilty Gear and Arcana Heart, but it still manages to maintain its own unique style, and most importantly, it plays really well and it's a lot of fun.
いい攻撃だ。待てよ、今こそ覚悟せよ。まだまだ。ではまたね、親友あげよ。まだまだ。ではまたね、親友あげよ。まだまだ。よし、あげれ。煉獄の七つ前。佐藤よし、あげれ。あんぱ。よし、あげれ。
The only complaint I really have with Ougon Musokyoku X is the limited gameplay modes, essentially just arcade, versus, and training. It does feature Xbox Live connectivity, but that's about it. There's a record area where you can monitor how much you use each character, a replay mode to play back your favorite matches, and there's also a nice gallery mode, which is always appreciated. But still, a survival mode, tournament, or even some mini-games would have been welcome additions. It still doesn't change the fact that the gameplay itself is great though. The presentation is also outstanding. It's kind of hard for me to believe that this is essentially an indie game. It was originally self-published, although obviously made by some very talented people. The graphics are great with some very colorful and detailed stages, and they look even cooler when you switch to the meta world. The character designs are also awesome. The whole game has a gothic, Victorian era feel mixed with anime, which really reminds me of Death Smiles actually. I think it's great. The soundtrack is fantastic. It's a blend of classical and even choir style music mixed with heavy metal, again reminding me a bit of Guilty Gear, with songs that make me think of Holy Orders, for example. You also get 2 separate intros in this game, both with their own song and both being really excellent. There's even quite a lot of voice acting included, which is cool too. On the whole, this is a very well made game with great graphics, a very cool visual style, and an amazing soundtrack, all of which complement its top-notch gameplay.
惜しいね。抜ける。僕の覚悟をぶつけよう。僕の真髄を感じたよ。権力、体力、暴力。これが大きな真実は揺るがない。そら、青の一撃だ。よっと、エレガントに行くぜ。どうだ。まだしますから。エレガントに行くぜ。どうだ。真実は揺るがない。まだまだ残りが。それゴミが。いや、それ来ないで。中心軸を固定してジャックメイト。
So this is a really great game, and I can easily recommend it to fighting game fans, especially if you feel like you've played pretty much everything out there. This one seems to have flown under the radar. It's not region free, unfortunately, so you'll have to either have a Japanese Xbox 360 or go for the PC version if you want a copy. It's typically between $20 and $30 on eBay, which I'd definitely be comfortable paying. If you're in the market for a fast-paced, stylish, and very fun fighting game, then definitely go for Ougon Musokyoku X. It's awesome.
あの日のかけらを見つけ出すその手がこの腕が金色の血に染まる
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of my new favorite Mega Drive platformers. It's Pulseman. And this is one that I'm really surprised that it didn't get an international release. It features a lot of the staples of more well-known platformers from the day. It was released in Japan only in 1994. It was published by Sega and developed by Game Freak of Pokemon fame. The plot is actually kind of an odd one. A scientist creates an artificial intelligent program known as a sea life and falls in love with her. So he digitizes himself to enter the program and share his DNA with her. And the result of this unholy union is a human sea life hybrid known as Pulseman, who can move between the real and virtual worlds. The scientist unfortunately emerges from the program as a twisted version of his former self and begins wreaking havoc all over the planet. So Pulseman, his son, sets out to stop him. It's a cautionary tale for all of you VR porn enthusiasts out there. This game combines a lot of very familiar elements from other 16-bit platformers and adds a couple of its own unique elements as well. Pulseman can move with a lot of speed. He picks up momentum pretty quickly, kind of like a slower version of Sonic, but also can run into enemies by accident as they appear on screen. Also like Sonic, you have a standard attack that looks like an electric punch, and as you run for a short distance, you build up a charge that allows you to fire off a blast of electricity. When you have a charge going, you can also activate your Voltecker, which turns you into a ball of electricity that bounces all over the screen. This can get you to some hard-to-reach places, and it doubles as an attack. There are even large wires that you can connect to for quick travel, and when they're strung together, they can become essentially a big maze that you speed through. The only thing that puts your charge out? Water, of course, and certain water-like enemies, which comes into play in later stages. And speaking of, there is a stage select, but you initially only have access to the first 3. And when you finish those, another 3 open up, and then the 7th and final stage. Each stage comes complete with a boss battle, which are all fun but pretty easy as far as boss battles go. And after each stage, you get to play a bonus game in the vein of Breakout. There are health power-ups and the occasional 1-ups scattered around each stage, but the things you'll want to keep an eye out for are the Spark Balls. Collect 10 and you get a 1-up. Overall, I really love this game. It plays fast, the controls are perfect, the difficulty is just right, and Pulseman is a likable character. It's an all-around fun experience. Graphically, I think Pulseman is really impressive. If I was going to describe the visuals with one word, that word would be colorful. All of the stages are extremely vibrant, especially when you cross into the virtual world. The casino stage in particular is almost seizure-inducing. I love it. It really conveys the feeling of being in a totally electric world. The character and enemy designs are great too, again reminding me a bit of Sonic, Mega Man, and even some Treasure games to a certain extent. On the whole, just a great looking game. The sound design is really good too, but it suffers in spots. For the most part, the soundtrack is great with a lot of upbeat, 90s techno-style songs that take full advantage of the Mega Drive sound chip. but other songs take a more minimalist approach and just sound like a bunch of beeps and boops. Those aren't so good, but they're few and far between. The sound effects are good as well, and there are some especially good voice clips for a 16-bit game. So on the whole, this is a game that features some awesome presentation to go along with its very fun gameplay. So this is a fantastic game that I think could have been really popular if it had gotten an international release, and I highly recommend playing it should you get the chance. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, copies being sold online are extremely expensive, sometimes up to and over $300. Luckily, there are also reproduction carts available out there that are much more reasonable. So if you're a fan of 16-bit platformers, and you're in the market for something that's both familiar but brings something new to the table, then definitely check out Pulseman. It's shockingly fun. And that joke was shockingly bad.
Gundam, the Battle Master.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Gundam, the Battle Master, for the PlayStation. This game was released in Japan only in 1997, and it was developed and published by Bandai with an assist from Natsume, who had developed the amazing Endless Duel for the Super Famicom. It's actually the first game in the series that eventually came to be known as Gundam Battle Assault. The plot sets itself apart from the usual Gundam story about wars between Earth and the space colonies, and instead centers around a number of bounty hunters in possession of mobile suits, which were invented as a means of protection for the human beings colonizing new planets. The mobile suits themselves are recognizable from different Gundam series, but the characters piloting them, on the other hand, I don't recognize at all outside of this game. Battle Master is a 2D fighter, and if you've played one of the Battle Assault games, then it's more or less just like those, but it features a handful of gameplay mechanics that would be changed later. First of all, I'll just say that the movement of the mobile suits is what I expected when I first played Endless Duel. They move rather slowly if you're not using your boosters, and they feel very robotic, which is appropriate, but also takes a little of the steam out of the gameplay. Luckily, you can use your boosters and fly infinitely, which was later changed. You also can't block projectiles in this game unless you use an energy shield or dodge into the background, which makes for some pretty cheap matches that consist of nothing but projectiles. There are also no super combos, just a few special moves that take away from your energy gauge, which can only be refilled by landing attacks. Your health meter is broken into 4 separate sections that fall away as you take damage, and repeatedly being hit in the same area will gradually break away the armor on your mobile suit. There are a handful of boss battles in the arcade mode, and these suits are massive, some not even fitting on the screen, requiring you to fly up to strike them in the head, and I really like these battles. Pretty much all of this was changed in the sequels to make them more like other fighting games, and whether or not this was for the best is up to the individual, but I personally prefer the gameplay in Battle Master. I find it to be more strategic and definitely more challenging than the later games. Sure, it's not a typical fighting game, but that's okay. If I want to play one of those, I can, but when I want something a little different, for better or worse, I can play Gundam Battle Master.
Here we go. Over.
The presentation in Battle Master is good for the most part, but I think it suffers in spots as far as the visuals are concerned. The mobile suits themselves look really good. They feature a lot of detail, and it's cool to see them gradually accumulate damage, and their movement is very appropriate. Again, it's robotic, and that's what I'd expect. The stages, on the other hand, aren't so great. They look okay, they're detailed enough, I guess, but there's literally no animation whatsoever, which is pretty lame. The graphics on the 16-bit Endless Duel should not be better than the 32-bit Battle Masters, but they are. The soundtrack, on the other hand, is really good. It's pretty much all high-energy rock tracks filled with synthesizers and screaming guitars. It's definitely got that 90s anime feel to it, which I really like. The sound effects are amazing as well, and for the most part lifted directly from the Gundam anime series. Again, I prefer the soundtrack from Endless Duel. Natsume games always had great soundtracks, but this one is still really good. Overall, while it's not the most impressive looking 2D fighter you're gonna play on a 32-bit console, it still accurately represents the source material, and the soundtrack is very fitting for this kind of game.
Wealth and glory to the winner.
So this is a pretty fun game and something different as far as 2D fighters go. I'd recommend it to fans of the genre and especially to fans of Gundam, which is always popular. Luckily, if you'd like a copy for yourself, this and all of the games in the Battle Assault series for that matter are really reasonably priced, usually no more than 10 to 20 bucks, which it's well worth. If you're looking for a 2D fighter that gives you some giant robots, huge guns, and energy swords to play around with, then get yourself a copy of Gundam Battle Master or Gundam Battle Assault. They're all awesome.
You better go fight some more.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at what I think is a very underappreciated 2D fighter, and that's Tengai Makyo Shinden, aka Far East of Eden Kabuki Klash for the Neo Geo CD. This game was developed by Red Entertainment and published by Hudson Soft in arcades, and on the Neo Geo consoles in 1995, and it's based on the wildly popular series of RPGs, or at least popular in Japan. It's set in the mystical world of Japan, which is a stylized, fictional version of Japan, and it features 8 playable characters from the first few games in the series, as well as 4 non-playable boss characters, and the entire game is steeped with imagery and sounds that will bring you right back to the RPGs, assuming that you've played them, of course. Kabuki Clash is, for the most part, a fairly standard 2D fighter as far as gameplay goes. It's a weapons-based fighter, so by virtue of that, it has something in common with fighters like Samurai Spirits and Last Blade. It utilizes a 4-button setup with 2 assigned to slashing with your weapon, and 2 for kicking, and you can press slash and kick buttons together to perform power strikes. Each character also has a couple of special moves, and by couple, I do mean 2, maybe 3. Not exactly the deepest move sets in this game, but everybody also has 2 or 3 magic attacks that can do quite a bit of damage. At the bottom of the screen, where you would normally find a super combo meter, you instead have a magic meter which automatically recharges after you execute a magic attack, and depending on which attack you do, you have weak and strong ones, determines how quickly it will recharge, thus allowing you to execute another magic attack. These can be some rather flashy and powerful attacks, some might say too powerful, but I like this mechanic. It's something different from your average 2D fighter, and it offers a risk-reward dynamic, because if you miss your attack, you'll be left waiting before you can execute another one, while your opponent now has an opportunity to use one on you. Also, as you fight, various items will appear on the battlefield that can either hurt or help you in some way, so you have to look out for those, rushing to pick them up in some cases and doing everything you can to avoid them in others. Overall, even if you took away the magic attacks and items, this would still be a good 2D weapons-based fighter that I wouldn't say is as good as Samurai Spirits, but is still very enjoyable. But with the inclusion of those things, it becomes just that much more fun, and it sets itself apart from the other mid-90s fighters. In short, I like it a lot.
3本目始め
Kabuki Clash is a very good looking game, and again it has a lot to do with the awesome source material. The character designs and art direction in all of the stages is taken from the RPGs, and I think it looks great. It's an extremely colorful and vibrant looking game with lots of detail and animation in the backgrounds, and the character animations are very fluid as well. They're also very well representative of the source material, which is to say how the characters are drawn and represented in the PC Engine cutscenes. That's pretty much how they look here, and they look great. On the whole, not much to complain about with the visuals, and the same can be said about the sound design, which is also outstanding. The soundtrack is a mix of traditional Japanese instruments with a classical score and even some high-energy screaming guitars. It's kind of an odd mix, but it actually works really well, and it's reflective of the series, which is very Japanese in its style, but draws on other inspirations as well. Every track is good, and I'd probably listen to this outside of the game. All of the voice work is really good too, and features the voice actors from the RPGs, which is appreciated. Also, despite being played on the Neo Geo CD, the load times aren't really that bad, usually no more than 10 seconds at a time. So on top of being a fun and responsive fighting game, it looks and sounds great too.
始め
「
Kabuki Clash is a great fighting game that should be really appealing to fans of Samurai Spirits or Last Blade. It's similar to those, but definitely has its own unique appeal. I recommend it wholeheartedly. If you want a physical copy, the Japanese CD version is probably the way to go. It can usually be found online for about $40, which isn't so bad, especially when compared to the few $100 for the AES version. And it's also region free. There's even a Korean PC version, which is extremely cheap, about $10. So whatever way you choose, get yourself a copy of Tengai Makyo Shinden, aka Far East of Eden Kabuki Clash, and get ready to go on a magical, exciting, painful journey into the mystical world of Japan. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the game with many names. It's known as Layer Section, Ray Storm, Galactic Attack, and Gunlock. It was developed and published by Taito, and it was released in arcades in 1994 and on the Sega Saturn in 1995, and it's available worldwide. It tells the story of a distant future when mankind has created a supercomputer called Con-Human to regulate and preserve the Earth's atmosphere. So of course it becomes self-aware and destroys most of humanity. The remaining humans have fled the planet to space colonies, but the Earth, which is now the body of Con-Human and a giant mobile battle station, is in pursuit of them, so there's no choice left. You must board your fighter ship and take the fight to the Earth. Classic. Layer Section is a top-down shooter with a lot of things in common with other shooters, but it does one thing that's unique, and that's the use of a lock-on laser attack that's used to destroy enemies coming from below you. You have a cursor in front of your ship, and anything that passes under it is locked on to and ready to be destroyed. And of course, anything that appears in front of you, you destroy with your main weapon. Power-ups appear as you destroy red enemies that upgrade your main weapon and your laser, not only making it more powerful, but also giving you more lock-ons. One thing that I don't like about Layer Section is that you have no bombs to fall back on, which is always a lifesaver in other shooters and would have been appreciated here. Also, your continues are limited and you cannot reduce the difficulty if you're having a hard time, which you might. This isn't the most difficult shooter I've ever played, but it is pretty tough. Those gripes aside though, I love this game. It's extremely fun and I do appreciate the difficulty. The lock-on laser is a really cool feature and constantly keeps you shifting your focus from in front of and below you, so you're always on your toes. Plus the boss battles are really great too. They're really big battleships with tons of weapons that you have to blow away bit by bit before you can destroy the core. Overall, I think Layer Section features some of the best gameplay of any shooter on the Saturn, and that includes a lot of those overpriced ones. I personally love the presentation in Layer Section. When it was originally released in '95, reviews weren't kind to the visuals, but I think they're great. Ironically enough, the layers exhibited in Layer Section look really good. The first couple of space levels especially, where you can look down and see tons of spaceships, asteroids, and enemies coming in for the kill. The levels on Earth are nice too, but not quite as impressive. Still, the game features a ton of detail and color in all of the stages, and the enemy and boss designs look great as well. The soundtrack is also really good. It's mostly fairly subdued tunes, kind of a techno-jazz mix, which I wouldn't have thought I'd like. I typically prefer really high energy songs on my shooters, but the tracks in Layer section sound fantastic and I really enjoyed them. They didn't detract from the gameplay at all. The sound effects are all top-notch too, and there are some voice clips here and there which are a bit muffled, but they're few and far between. All things considered, Layer section features some great visuals, great sound design, and excellent gameplay. So this is a great game that I'd recommend to any shooter fan. I'd especially recommend it over some of the more expensive shooters for the system, such as Radiant Silvergun for example, because it can be found online for much less. The Japanese version especially, which goes for between 30 and 40 bucks, usually about half of what you'll pay for a US or European version. Whatever way you can though, whether it be on the Saturn in an arcade or on a Taito compilation disc, play Layer Section, Galactic Attack, Ray Storm, Gunlock, Barkley, Shut Up and Jam. Scratch that last one. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of my favorite Mega Drive shooters, and that's Battle Mania, otherwise known as Troubleshooter in North America. It was released in 1992, and it was developed and published by Vic Tokai, who developed a lot of awesome games, like Decap Attack and the 8-bit Golgo 13 games. Battle Mania has you playing as Mania and Maria, two agents of the International Troubleshooters Association, trying to rescue a young prince from an evil mastermind who wants to rule the world, of course. The plot is moved along by short cutscenes, and the whole thing kinda reminds me of a series of episodes of Dirty Pair. It's a bit on the wacky side, which I like, especially when there's a fake ending that makes it as far as the staff roll, before it's interrupted by the main villain. That's just great. The gameplay in Battle Mania is pretty unique as far as Mega Drive shooters go. The closest thing I could compare it to is Forgotten Worlds. Mania and Maria fly through the air on jetpacks, and while Mania can only shoot to the right of the screen, you can change the direction that Maria is facing whenever you want to take care of enemies coming from in front of or behind you, which is awesome. Not too many shooters did this back in the day. Before each level, you have 4 sub-weapons you can choose from that act as both a helper option and as your bombs. You have a meter to the top right of the screen that fills up over time, allowing you to use a screen-clearing attack, and it's unlimited. It just takes a minute to recharge. There's actually a level where the prince joins you in battle after you rescue him, which is cool, but I actually found it to be a little tougher than the rest of the game because you lose the ability to use your bombs. This is one of the easier shooters on the Mega Drive though, mostly because you have infinite bombs and the game is very generous with power-ups. Plus, there doesn't seem to be any limit on how many hit points you can accumulate. You do have limited continues, but it's unlikely that you'll use them all. Still, Battlemania controls extremely well, the level designs and enemies are varied, and the boss battles are over the top and a lot of fun as well. Like I said, this is one of my favorite Mega Drive shooters, and its gameplay is outstanding. Battlemania sports some really nice graphics for a 1992 release. Every stage is really colorful and loaded with lots of detail. Some in particular seem to stretch way back into the backgrounds. There's also a lot of multiple scrolling layers here and there which look great. The character designs, enemy and boss designs, they all look nice too. The whole game has kind of an early 90s anime look and feel to it, which I really like. The sound design is really good too. I especially like the soundtrack, which perfectly matches the tone of each stage, with some being more bubbly and high energy, while others have a more serious and foreboding feel to them. I don't think there are any all-time classic songs here or anything, but they're all pleasant to listen to, and give a good showcase of the Mega Drive sound chip. There are even some good sound effects and decent voice clips. So overall, a game with great gameplay complemented by some excellent visual and audio design, which is typically the case with Vic Tokai games, a really underrated old school developer if you ask me. So this is a great game that I can easily recommend to shooter fans. Even if you're not big into shooters, I'm sure you could get some enjoyment out of this one. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately though, if you go looking for a copy online, regardless of which version you're looking for, it goes for multiple hundreds of dollars, which is going to be totally unreasonable for most people. So I wouldn't blame you if you opted to go for a ROM instead. Whatever way you can, definitely play Battlemania, aka Troubleshooter, aka Dirty Pair with jetpacks. Did they ever wear jetpacks on Dirty Pair? Whatever, play Battlemania, it's awesome. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Kunio-kun no Nekketsu Soccer League for the Famicom. This game was developed and published by Technos in Japan only in 1993. And if you're thinking to yourself, this really looks a lot like Nintendo World Cup, well, that's because it's a sequel to that game, which was called Nekketsu High School Dodgeball Club Soccer Edition in Japan, itself being a sequel to Super Dodgeball. In that version, Kunio and his friends joined the soccer team to win a national championship, and in this game, they're trying to win a world championship. This is just one of the many Kunio-kun games not released outside of Japan, unfortunate though it may have been for us Western types. If you've played Nintendo World Cup, then you'll be pretty comfortable with Soccer League. It controls basically the exact same. You have direct control over one player on your team, and some control over the others, meaning you can't control their movement, but when they have ball control, you can make them pass and shoot. You can jump with the ball, perform trick shots, and some really crazy power shots, like turning the ball into a ninja shuriken, for example. When you're on the defense, you and your teammates can run roughshod on your opponents and tackle and kick them at your leisure. No penalties here. One feature that mixes the gameplay up a bit is various weather effects on the field. You'll slip around in rainwater, be struck by lightning, and even be thrown around by hurricane-force winds. Before each match, you can check the weather, amongst other things like character stats, strategies, and you can even go through a list of background music and choose your favorite. Overall, I enjoy the gameplay in Soccer League, as I do with pretty much all Kunio-kun games, but I would have loved to have had complete control over all of my players. As it is, they can be a bit unruly, but they can also play way better than you at times, so it's got its faults, but it's definitely a fun play. The presentation in Soccer League is going to look and sound really familiar to anybody who's played any other games in the Kunio-kun series, like Super Dodgeball, River City Ransom, or Crash and the Boys Street Challenge. The character designs haven't changed at all, and that's a good thing if you ask me. I've always really liked them. The fields themselves are colorful and detailed, at least as much as a soccer field can be, and the international teams look great. Team Mexico and its masked wrestlers are especially choice. The sound design is also really good. Again, what else would you expect from this series? Every tune is upbeat and catchy, and all of the sound effects are great too, and very recognizable as well. In my humble opinion, Technos had some of the best looking and sounding 8-bit games, and this one just keeps that tradition going. It's great. So this is an excellent game and worthy sequel to Nintendo World Cup. I definitely recommend it. If you look online though, prices for a copy can go from $40 to $60, which is pretty steep. You might want to play one of the translated ROMs instead, and failing that, you can always go back to Nintendo World Cup, which is still a great game. Regardless, you'll have a good time because Technos definitely had a way with sports games. If you're in the mood for some 8-bit soccer action, then definitely check out Kunio-kun no Nekketsu Soccer League. It's awesome. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Shijo Saikyo no Deshi Kenichi Gekito Ragnarok Hachikengo. But for all our sakes, we're going to refer to it by its Western name, Kenichi the Mightiest Disciple. This game was developed by Renderware and published by Capcom in Japan only in 2007, and it's based on the series of manga and anime of the same name. It's about a wimpy high school kid named Kenichi who has a problem with bullies. That is, until he becomes friends with a girl named Miyu and starts training with her at Ryozanpaku Dojo, where some of the world's greatest martial arts masters live. He then goes on to battle all kinds of crazy, martial arts obsessed teenagers. Overall, a pretty cool show, and the plot translates well to the game. Kenichi is a one-on-one fighter that combines elements of both 3D and 2D fighters. The combo system, for example, is pretty typical of a 3D fighter, albeit a simplified one. You have weak and strong attack buttons, and you can chain them together into long combos, but the special attacks are performed as you would in a 2D fighter, with quarter circles combined with button presses. This means that you can combine combos and special attacks to keep your combos going even longer, and for the most part it plays pretty smoothly. Aside from that, you have a counter button which, if timed correctly, allows you to counter most strikes, and you have a power strike button that can be used to break your opponent's guard, if you have at least one super combo stock. And speaking of, your super combo gauge at the bottom of the screen fills up to 3 stocks and can be used in a couple of different ways. You can either activate a hyper mode where all of your stats get a boost, or at the cost of 2 stocks you can perform your character's signature super combo, which always looks pretty cool. Matches can end by either knockout or ring out, and there are 13 playable characters in total, each with a rather unique fighting style. There are a handful of different gameplay modes in Kenichi, including a pretty robust story mode, training mode, versus, score attack, and a whole bunch of mini-games as well, which are unlocked as you play through the story mode, and they're all pretty fun. There's also a gallery with character bios and stills from the story mode. Overall, the gameplay in Kenichi is good, and there's a variety of ways to play. It's not exactly a perfect 3D fighter or anything, but for what it is, it's really fun, and the combo system is actually deeper than I might have thought. This is a pretty decent looking game. It's not the best adaptation of an anime I've ever seen, but it's definitely not bad. The cell shading looks good, the character designs are nice and do the show justice, and all of the stages look pretty good too. A lot of cool little details. My only gripe is that aside from the intro, which is awesome, there's no other 2D animation in the game, just still images, which is a bit disappointing. I thought there might have been at least some clips from the show or something. The sound design is pretty good too. The soundtrack has kind of a funk rock mix of tunes, which is reminiscent of the soundtrack from the show, and the voice work is done by the original Japanese cast, which is always appreciated. On the whole, while it's not mind-blowing in any one area, this is a good-looking and sounding game that draws on some excellent source material. I like it. I like it a lot.
勝負はこれからだ。はえーならい無拍子。勝負あった。
So this is a pretty awesome game that I can recommend to both fighting fans and fans of the Kenichi anime. And more good news, it's rather cheap, sometimes going for as little as $5 on eBay and 20 at the most, so it's not a huge gamble if you decide to pick it up. And while you're at it, check out the manga or anime. It's pretty rad. Kind of like the Karate Kid, but with more karate, more fights, and way more boobs. It's Shijo Saikyo no Deshi Kenichi Gekito Ragnarok Hachikengo, and that's a mouthful. Check it out.
Shoreviewken! Shoreviewken!
Street Fighter Zero.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the ever so awesome Street Fighter Zero for the Sega Saturn. Also known as Street Fighter Alpha, it was developed and published by Capcom, first in arcades in 1995 and on the Saturn and PlayStation in 1996. It was released worldwide and can also be found on the Street Fighter Alpha PS2 collection and the PlayStation Network. It's set after the original Street Fighter and before Street Fighter 2, and introduces a deeper plot than had been seen in the series previously. It explains the source of Vega's psycho power, the origin of Rose, and the backstories of characters like Nash, Chun-Li, and Guy. And the story and character roster would continue to expand in the sequels. Street Fighter Zero maintains the basic setup established by Street Fighter 2. It utilizes a 6-button setup, and one thing that's a little different this time around is the ability to string together combos using light, medium, and heavy attacks, much like in Darkstalkers and X-Men Children of the Atom, which were both released around the same time. Zero also expands upon the Super Combo system established in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Here each character has a couple of different super combos, and the super combo meter features 3 different stages, and the fuller it is, the more powerful of an attack you can do, depending on which attack button you press. And this mechanic would carry over into the sequels. Each of the game's 10 initially playable characters are pretty diverse in terms of speed, power, and special moves, and aside from Birdie and Sodom, I like them all. Overall, while Zero isn't a vast improvement in gameplay over previous entries in the series, and it would be greatly improved upon in the 2 sequels, this is still a really exceptional fighting game with some tight controls and super fun gameplay, which is pretty par for the course in terms of mid-90s Capcom fighters. I like it a lot.
You win.
The presentation in Street Fighter Zero is excellent for the most part, though it would also be improved upon greatly in the sequels. It introduces a much more colorful and anime-inspired visual style, which again is in keeping with other Capcom mid-90s fighters like Darkstalkers and X-Men, and I really like it. This might actually be my favorite representation of the Street Fighter characters. The stages all look good for the most part, but some of them lack animation and are pretty static, and characters share stages instead of everybody getting their own. But still a very good looking game on the Saturn. The soundtrack is also really good, but kind of odd in that the designers went with a very jazz funk style for a lot of the stage themes, which is really passive for a fighting game, but still enjoyable, and there are a few higher energy tracks thrown in for good measure. Overall, Street Fighter Zero features some great visuals and sound design, and while it's not as good in any one department as the sequels would prove to be, it's still a very well made game.
You win. Round 2. Fight.
Hadouken! Hadouken! Shoreviewken!
KO. You win. Perfect.
If you're a fighting game fan, and a Street Fighter fan in particular, and you haven't played Street Fighter Zero yet, then I'd say go back and give it a try. You probably won't be blown away by the gameplay, but I'm willing to bet you'd enjoy it. It's fun, and it has a real mid-90s charm. Like I said, the sequels are much better, but we'll get around to that. And good news, this is an extremely affordable game. Taking a look at eBay, it can usually be found for around $10, which is an absolute steal. Buy it today. It's Street Fighter Zero, aka Street Fighter Alpha Warrior's Dreams, and it's awesome.
Metal Slug.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the original Metal Slug for the Geo CD. It was developed by Nazca Corporation, who developed games like In the Hunt prior to this, and it was published by SNK. It's been released for the Neo Geo AES, the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, Virtual Console, PSN, and a whole bunch of others. The plot centers around Marco Rossi and Tarma Roving, two elite commandos trying to infiltrate and destroy the rebel military of the evil General Morden, who, as it turns out, has gained control of the new prototype Metal Slug all-terrain combat vehicle, which is why there are so many scattered around the levels. Later games would incorporate all kinds of crazy plot twists involving aliens, robots, zombies, and so forth, but this one sticks with the tried and true bring down the evil dictator archetype, which is always a classic. Metal Slug is basically just an over-the-top run-and-gun style game, in the same vein as games like Contra and Gunstar Heroes, for example, but it definitely has its own unique style and gameplay elements. You start each level with just a handgun that has infinite ammo and a stock of 10 grenades, but littered throughout each level are a ton of weapons, like machine guns and rocket launchers, as well as extra grenades. These weapons and other point bonuses can be dropped by defeated enemies, found in crates that you destroy, or awarded to you by rescued POWs. The one drawback here is that after taking just one hit, you lose all of your weapon power-ups, so you have to be really careful. Enemies come at you from every angle, and it's really easy to get hit by bullets, rockets, or whatever else they throw at you. Plus, there are the occasional pitfalls to look out for. The best power-up of all is definitely the Metal Slug tank that has mounted machine guns, a cannon, and it can take 3 hits before being destroyed. And you can replenish its health by picking up gas cans. Every level has at least one Metal Slug in it, and they can be a real lifesaver, especially against the game's big, heavily armed bosses. If you can manage to complete a level with the Metal Slugs still intact, as well as having rescued a few POWs, you'll get a big bunch of bonus points. Later games would introduce more weapons and vehicles, but this one doesn't suffer for not having them. It plays really well, it's a lot of fun, and it's very challenging. It can be a bit frustrating at times, especially when you pick up your favorite weapon, only to be killed seconds later, but overall it's a very enjoyable game, and a great way to kick off the series.
Shotgun! Thank you! Thank you, thank you!
The presentation in Metal Slug is excellent. This is a series that has definitely always had a very distinct visual style. The character designs have a very cartoonish and wacky look to them, and makes the game come across as more comical as opposed to other run-and-gun games which usually go for a grittier style. The vehicle designs are really elaborate and cool, and the stages are super detailed and really colorful as well, with a lot of activity going on at any one time. This can cause a bit of slowdown, but it's nothing game-breaking. Also, the load times aren't so bad either, usually no more than 10 seconds or so, which might surprise you if you've heard about these supposedly atrocious load times on the Neo Geo CD. The sound design is really good too. The soundtrack is kind of a mix of jazz and rock style tracks with others that don't really seem to have a style, other than that they're meant to complement the action. Almost like the score to an action movie or something, but it all sounds good and suits the gameplay really well. The sound effects are good too, and I love the announcer for this game. Every time he says "Rocket Launcher," I chuckle a little bit. On the whole, the presentation in Metal Slug, and the entire Metal Slug series for that matter, is unique and matches the fun, fast-paced gameplay perfectly.
Thank you!
So this is a game and a series that I personally love and recommend to pretty much anybody. I can't imagine anyone not enjoying it. I'm not going to bother going over price listings because this game and its sequels have appeared on just about every platform since its original inception in 1996, so you'll definitely be able to find Metal Slug in one form or another for a reasonable price. Whether it be physical or digital, it's all good. If you're in need of some pulse-pounding, mind-blowing, ass-kicking action to the max, then play Metal Slug. It's so awesome it hurts. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Dragon Ball Z Buyu Retsuden for the Sega Mega Drive. It was developed and published by Bandai, and it was released in 1994, officially in Japan, France, and Spain, and unofficially in Portugal. It's obviously based on the legendary series of manga and anime created by Akira Toriyama, and it features 11 playable characters from the Frieza and Cell story arcs. It's also the only DBZ game to appear on the Mega Drive, unlike the Super Famicom, which had a ton of them. I guess Bandai suffered from a little console bias. Buyu Retsuden is essentially the Mega Drive version of one of the Super Butoden games. It plays exactly like those with only a few differences, which are just to suit the Mega Drive controller. Even if you're playing with a 6-button controller, this game only makes use of 3. A punches, B kicks, holding A and B together charges up your energy meter, and C allows you to switch back and forth from ground to air, and all of these special attacks are performed with the same button combinations that you'll find in Super Butoden. You can dash around by double tapping the directional buttons, and when there's enough distance between the two characters, the match goes to split screen, and this is when you can launch giant energy attacks at one another. Even if your energy is low, you can still perform these attacks. You'll just be exhausted for a short while afterwards, and if you're on the receiving end, you can dodge, deflect, counter, or just take the blast to the face. You only have 2 gameplay modes to choose from, story and versus. No Tenkaichi Budokai, unfortunately. The gameplay in Buyu Retsuden seems like it should be pretty good on paper at least, but the execution is far from perfect. The controls feel pretty stiff and delayed, and everything has a real floaty feel to it, even if you're not actually floating, and despite the advent of blast processing, it suffers from some very slow and sluggish gameplay. Honestly, I expected a lot better, but unfortunately, Buyu Retsuden fails to live up to Super Butoden in the gameplay department. The presentation in Buyu Retsuden, unlike the gameplay, really impressed me. Not the visuals so much, which are decent. They at least look as good as their Super Famicom counterparts. The characters look like you'd want them to. They're all well representative of the source material. And the stages are nicely detailed and colorful too. No complaints at all, but the sound design definitely outshines the visuals if you ask me. This is the one area where Buyu Retsuden doesn't emulate Super Butoden, and instead goes for its own original soundtrack, which sounds fantastic. Every track is high energy and very well suited to a DBZ game. I actually prefer it over the Super Butoden soundtracks. When playing Versus mode, you're actually allowed to pick whatever track you want during the match, and just like a lot of the other Mega Drive games I've covered recently, there are some excellent voice clips here from the cast of the DBZ anime, which is always awesome. Overall, Buyu Retsuden features some decent visuals and great sound design that, along with the license, make this game at least somewhat enjoyable because the gameplay is definitely subpar. So this isn't really a very good game. It's pretty much only going to appeal to DBZ fans and doesn't have much to offer fighting game fans. It's not a terribly expensive game, thankfully. A complete copy can be found on eBay, usually for around $30 or so, but if you want this style of 16-bit DBZ game, then I'd recommend going with either Super Butoden 2 or 3 on the Super Famicom, or even Shin Butoden on the Sega Saturn. They're all better games, and they're typically more affordable too. But if you're a hardcore DBZ or Mega Drive collector, then you probably won't hate Buyu Retsuden, but you definitely won't love it. Aside from Piccolo, who you have to love no matter what. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the little slice of shooter heaven known as Gate of Thunder for the PC Engine CD. It was developed by Red Entertainment and published by Hudson Soft, and it was released in Japan and North America in 1992. It was actually a pack-in game with the US Turbo Duo along with Bonk's Adventure and Bonk's Revenge, and it's the precursor to the amazing Lords of Thunder. It has you playing as Hawk, a space cop, doing everything in your power to prevent the evil Obalon army from obtaining the energy source known as Starlight and thus seizing control of the galaxy, or the quadrant, the universe, or something. Gate of Thunder is for the most part a pretty standard side-scrolling shooter, but it's a very well-made one. Gameplay is fairly fast and challenging, the controls are really responsive, and it's a whole lot of fun, which is what you'd expect from a Hudson-published shooter. You don't have any bombs to fall back on in this game, which usually irritates me, but it's made up for with the variety of the power-ups. Your partner in the Wildcat ship will routinely fly onto the screen and drop off items for you to collect that can give you homing missiles, defensive shields, and a whole variety of different shot types that can also be powered up as well. Plus, when your ship is at max power, picking up another power-up will cause a wave of energy to fly across the screen and destroy any remaining enemies, so it's kind of like having bombs. You just have no control over when you use them. There's quite a bit of variety in the different stages as well, not just visually, but also in the different enemies and hazards that present themselves. There might be some falling debris, incoming asteroids, or the stage itself might warp and change, limiting how much area you have to move around in. The boss battles also present a nice variety of ships and monsters that all require different strategies to bring down, and they're all fun and challenging. If the game is getting too challenging for you, you do have limited continues. You can tone it down a bit in the options menu, though I would put this one in the easier tier of shooters on the PC Engine. Overall, while Gate of Thunder isn't my favorite shooter, I think it's a little on the generic side, and I do prefer Lords of Thunder. It's still a really fun and well-made game. It's definitely above average. Gate of Thunder features some outstanding presentation, again, what you'd expect from Red and Hudson, who always made games with great visuals and sound design. The look of this game is very much classic sci-fi, with stages set in outer space, and on alien worlds with lots of spaceships, robots, huge aliens, and so forth. And again, you're playing as a space cop, which would make for a great sci-fi movie title, actually. Everything is very detailed, and there are lots of multiple scrolling layers in the backgrounds, which looks really nice. On the whole, just a great looking 2D game, and the sound design is just as good, if not better. The soundtrack, while I don't think it measures up to Lords of Thunder, which is one of my all-time favorites, it is still really good. It's kind of a mix between heavy metal and more dramatic sounding synth music. It's a great mix of sounds, and it matches the gameplay very well. The sound effects do tend to drown out the music a bit though. A good soundtrack is critical to my enjoyment of a shooter, and this one doesn't disappoint. In fact, it doesn't really disappoint in any area. It looks great, it sounds great, and it plays really well. There's very little to complain about with this one. So I can easily recommend Gate of Thunder to fans of the side-scrolling shooter genre. I don't think it's the best on the console, but it is really good. Physical copies can be pretty expensive, unfortunately, potentially over $100, which I wouldn't recommend paying, but it is also available for the Virtual Console and the PlayStation Network, which might not be quite the same thing as playing on original hardware, but it is a whole hell of a lot cheaper, and you're still sure to have a good time. There just aren't enough spaceship shooters in your collection and you're jonesing for a little of that sweet space cop action, then definitely play Gate of Thunder. It's awesome.
Summer, 1975. A nightmare awaits me. I am being recalled to Nautorm headquarters. Do I have to go back to the hell again?
Hello, maggots, and welcome to hell. It's NAM 1975, and it's a whole lot of fun! This game was developed and published by SNK in arcades and on the Neo Geo AES in 1990, and it was available when the Neo Geo CD launched in 1994. It's obviously set during the tail end of the Vietnam War, and centers around Silver and Brown, players 1 and 2 respectively, as they infiltrate a North Vietnamese military base to rescue the American scientist Dr. Muckley and his daughter. The plot and setting is one of the better and often more comical aspects of this game, as it makes tons of references to movies like Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now, even lifting the likenesses of some of the characters directly from those films.
Too late. You are not the enemy for my new weapon.
NAM is an action-shooting extravaganza that plays pretty much like the Punisher on the NES. Your character is in the foreground, and there's a cursor on screen to indicate where you're shooting. All of the enemies are in the background, and their bullets, grenades, etc. come flying in at you. You move left to right pretty slowly, but by holding down the C button, you can dash back and forth really quickly, which is what you'll mostly be doing as the screen tends to fill up with enemies in pretty short order. You can also perform a safe roll by pressing diagonally down in either direction with the C button, which is a lifesaver as you're pretty much invincible while rolling. You also have a stock of grenades that you can lob into the background, and as you kill enemies, extra grenades, point bonuses, and even more powerful weapons, such as a flamethrower, will fall to the ground for you to pick up. If you see an enemy holding a woman in a red dress hostage, kill him immediately. The woman will pick up a machine gun and join you in battle, and she's a really good shot. She'll stay with you as long as you don't die, which is a pretty tall order because this is a fairly difficult game, especially the boss battles, which often feel super cheap, but then again, this was an arcade game and made specifically to eat up all of your loose change, so it is forgivable. Really though, this is one of my favorite SNK action titles. It's super fun and challenging. The controls are simple and really responsive, and it has a cheese factor that makes me think of some of the mini Reb Brown 80s action films where he single-handedly destroys a small Southeast Asian country. Put simply, it's fucking awesome! The presentation in NAMM 1975 is for the most part what I think makes this game stand out in my mind, and not because of how good it is, which isn't to say that it's all bad, far from it. The characters, the stages, the enemy vehicles and bosses, it all looks great, and the soundtrack is awesome as well. It sounds like the score to an 80s action movie. But the simple fact that it's a game about the Vietnam War that includes robots, wacky looking characters, a ton of ripped off ideas, and a kidnapped scientist plot makes me think this really was meant to be a Reb Brown film, and somehow the script ended up in the hands of an employee at SNK. The icing on the cake in NAMM 1975 is definitely the cutscenes that play between stages. They are the stuff of legend. They look okay and they serve to move the plot along just fine, but the voice acting is something you will never forget. It is glorious.
New operations have been watched.
You will die!
We went to the enemy camp, even though we knew it would be dangerous.
Oh no! You're real enemies!
Tell us, how do you know our plan?
I don't know. Wait, I know.
So this is a very fun and sometimes hilarious action game that I personally love and recommend wholeheartedly. For me, it's right up there with other SNK action classics like Mutation Nation and Magician Lord. It's great. Prices online, on the other hand, are not great. It's actually a fairly expensive game. The AES version, as you might expect, can go for as much as a couple $100, and the CD version, while much cheaper at 60 to 70 bucks on average, still isn't what I would call reasonable for a game that you'll finish in about 30 minutes. Luckily, it's available now on the Virtual Console, which might not be quite the same as playing on Neo Geo hardware, but it's a whole hell of a lot cheaper. If you want to be able to tell some NAMM stories of your own someday, maybe one about how you took some shrapnel in Khe-san, then combed through the deep, hairy bush that is NAMM 1975. The horror. The horror. The fun!
The world is mine!
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of the all-time great shoot-'em-ups, and that's Batsugun for the Sega Saturn. It was developed by Toaplan, who had already developed a number of great shooters, like Truxton and Zero Wing, and it was originally published by Taito and released in arcades in 1993, with the distinction of perhaps being the first ever Manic-style shooter, which would later be further popularized by Cave. This Saturn version was released in 1996 in Japan only, and it was published by Banpresto. Toaplan had already closed its doors by that point, so the console translation was handled by Gazelle, and I'd say they did a perfect job, even improving on the arcade version in a few spots. Like I said, Batsugun is classified as a manic shooter, which is like a normal shooter but with more elaborate enemy and bullet patterns, faster gameplay, and a smaller hitbox on your ship, kind of the precursor to the bullet hell style. It features 3 playable ships that all have different shot types, bombs, and pilots, best of which is definitely Iceman, who looks an awful lot like Val Kilmer, so he gets bonus points for that. One thing that sets Batsugun apart from the other early 90s shooters is that there's a leveling system. You can collect power-up icons to build up your shot, but as you destroy enemies, you also build up an experience meter, and each time you level up, your shot evolves into a more powerful and destructive form. In addition to that, you also have a limited number of screen-clearing bombs, and it's best to hold on to them for the boss battles, which get pretty intense. You have 2 gameplay modes to choose from in Batsugun: the classic arcade mode, which is 5 stages long and is more or less Batsugun as it originally was, and the special mode, which makes a few changes like a smaller hitbox, more powerful bombs, and some changes to the visuals. And instead of ending after 5 stages, the game continues to loop as the difficulty increases. On the whole, Batsugun is a fantastic shooter and well worth its reputation. It's actually one of my favorite shooters for the Saturn, which is saying a lot. I first played this game in the arcade and immediately knew I had to have a copy of my own, and I wasn't disappointed. This is an excellent port of the arcade classic. The graphics in Batsugun are pretty good, again at least on par with the arcade, though it's my understanding that issues with slowdown from the arcade version were fixed in this one. This isn't an overly imaginative game as far as level designs go. You're not going to see any elaborate star bases or anything, but what is here is at least fairly well detailed and colorful. The enemy and boss designs are really cool. They actually give me kind of a Dodon Pachi feel. And the action is really fast-paced, again with no slowdown, which is greatly appreciated. You're also given several different display options to suit whatever kind of monitor you may be using. The sound design is also really good, and you also have a couple of options for the soundtrack as well. You can stick with the original arcade soundtrack, which is awesome, with a lot of high-energy tracks that perfectly fit a shooter like this. And there's an arranged soundtrack, which improves on the sound quality, but takes the teeth out of most of the songs. They're both good, but I tend to stick with the original. Overall, while I won't deny that Batsugun looks and sounds really good, the main selling point is definitely the incredible gameplay. So this is an amazing shooter, and one I definitely recommend to shooter fans. It's a classic. Unfortunately, this is yet another Saturn game that sells for exorbitant amounts of money online. We're talking multiple hundreds of dollars, which is way too much to ask for the vast majority of us. So if you can play a digital version, then I'd say go for that. Or if you find it in an arcade by some crazy coincidence, then drop a few quarters in and get ready to enter the danger zone. It's Batsugun, and it's excellent. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Cosmo Warrior Zero for the PlayStation. This game was developed and published by Taito and released in Japan only in 2000. And it's based on a series of OVAs of the same name that tie into older anime like Gun Frontier and Space Pirate Captain Harlock. And if the character designs look familiar, that's because it's from the same studio that produced Space Battleship Yamato and Galaxy Express 999, amongst many others. And the story centers around the title character, Warrior Zero, who lost his family in a war between humans and robots, and is now on a mission for the Earth's space fleet to bring in the legendary space pirate, Captain Harlock, and to that end he battles with all kinds of crazy characters throughout the galaxy. Cosmo Warrior Zero is essentially an arena combat game, and the closest things I can compare it to are the Capcom developed Spawn and Heavy Metal Dreamcast games. You take control of your selected character. Initially only Zero is available, but you can unlock more, and you and your opponent run around in an enclosed area trying to shoot, slash, and lob grenades at each other. It's a very simple premise and one that's pretty much always fun, very pick up and play. The controls are pretty easy to get the hang of. The face buttons each perform a different attack. The shoulder buttons allow you to strafe, do a 360 turn, and tuck and roll. And movement is best done with the analog sticks. It's a tad awkward with the D-pad. And scattered around each stage are power-ups to be contended for. There are two gameplay modes to choose from. One is basically an arcade mode, where you just plow through all the other characters one after another, and the other is a story mode that has you playing through various levels, killing lesser enemies, collecting items, and navigating mazes before you face the boss character, who is one of the other playable characters in the battle mode. These levels are fun, but the nature of the camera makes it difficult to focus on more than one enemy at a time, so it's very common to be hit from the side or from behind by an enemy that you didn't even know was there. But this mode makes the game a much better single-player experience and adds to the playtime as well, and not in a bad way. It is enjoyable. Also in this mode, you can collect items to unlocked images to be viewed in the gallery mode. Mostly just production art and portraits, but when it comes to anime-based games, galleries are always appreciated. Overall, this is a really fun, fairly fast-paced, and action-packed game. It's lacking some of the polish that other arena shooters from the late 90s and early 2000s had, but for what it is, it's good. It didn't knock my socks off, but at no point was I ever having a bad time.
やりますね。
これでこのくらいで
presentation in Cosmo Warrior Zero is a little weak, mostly in the sound department. The visuals are decent, about as good as you might expect from PS1 graphics. Everything is shaped well, not much problems with jagged edges and so forth, but the textures are a little lacking in detail, which is especially noticeable when you're up close to enemies and surfaces. It is a fairly colorful game though, and it doesn't suffer from slowdown, which is excellent. The cutscenes, on the other hand, are kind of disappointing. They're drawn well enough, and I love the character designs, but it's all still images. When I'm playing an anime-based game, especially on a 32-bit console, I want to see some animation. So they look nice, but completely lack motion. The sound design is the most underwhelming area of the game for me, though. All of the music is extremely passive, almost ambient at times. And there are points during the story mode where it is literally nothing but ambient sound, no music at all. The music that is here isn't bad, it's just probably not the music I would have gone with for such an action-oriented game. The voice acting is really good though, and so are the sound effects. So on the whole, I'd say the presentation is decent, and you'll like it more if you're a fan of this series, but for me, the gameplay and the license are the real draws here.
だからどうしたというのだ。今の俺にこの遺跡のことは関係ない。
土地郎がなぜあなたを私のところに連れてきたのか、その意味を分かってくれなかったのですね。
そんな意味を知る必要はない。行くぞ、エメラルダス。
ならばそういうことですね。
So this is a pretty fun game that lacks a bit of finesse here and there, but is ultimately an enjoyable experience and probably something that fans of this and similar series will want to give a try, which I would recommend. Perhaps best of all, this is an extremely affordable game. Brand new factory sealed copies can be found online for around $20, and used copies go for as little as $5, which it's well worth. If you're a fan of arena-style action shooting games in the vein of Spawn and Heavy Metal, and you've got a taste for classic anime, then Cosmo Warrior Zero might just be right up your alley. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at perhaps the prettiest beat-em-up of all time, except for maybe Combat Tribes. It's Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon for the Mega Drive. This 1994 release was published by MABA, and it was actually developed by Arc System Works. So this was back before they became the kings of the 2D fighters. And while the SNES version got a European release, this one remained exclusive to Japan. As far as the plot goes, well, you have all 5 Sailor Scouts to choose from, and they fight bad guys. I haven't seen the show since I was 10 years old, so I'm not exactly up to date on my Sailor Moon lore. It does feature Tuxedo Mask, though, so that's a plus. This is your basic beat 'em up a la Streets of Rage or Final Fight, but it's missing a few of the staples of the genre. For instance, there are no weapons to use, which admittedly it might look out of place if Sailor Moon was bashing people's heads in with a lead pipe, but that doesn't mean that I didn't want to see it. You also don't get health power-ups from breaking things. Instead, they're just scattered around in the levels in the forms of cakes and ice creams, etc. There's even a level that's comprised entirely of cake and ice cream. One thing this game does do well is that each of the girls has a few special moves that are either executed by holding the attack button down for a few seconds or by inputting a button combination, which most beat-em-ups didn't do in the early 90s. And of course, you also have the obligatory power move, which drains a bit of your health. That's really about it. For the most part, this is a pretty generic beat-em-up. It's also really easy, but somehow really frustrating at the same time, mainly because every enemy in the game is faster than you and has a longer reach, except for Sailor Venus, of course, who fights using a whip. It's easy to get surrounded and pummeled, but other than that, this is a decent playing game. Definitely not on the level of Streets of Rage or TMNT, but still a fun play. The presentation here is actually a lot better than I might have thought. It's a Sailor Moon game, so obviously it's going to be really colorful with some odd-looking character designs, but there's typically a lot of detail in all of the stages as well, even some multiple layers here and there, which looks great. The character animations are a bit stiff, but the characters themselves look nice, so it evens out. The soundtrack is pretty good too. A lot of the tracks are more on the weak and whimsical side, but they still sound good, and the higher energy songs sound even better. You even get the Mega Drive rendition of the classic Sailor Moon theme, which is awesome. The sound effects are kind of weak and semi-muted sounding, but there are quite a lot of voice clips, and they sound pretty good. So on the whole, while it's not the best looking or sounding game on the Mega Drive, it is vibrant and pleasant to look at and listen to. I'd say the presentation and the license outshine the gameplay this time around. So this is a decent beat-em-up that you might want to get your hands on if you're a Sailor Moon fan. But if you missed out on it, don't feel bad. There are way better beat-em-ups out there than this one, and I'm willing to bet you've probably played them. Plus, copies of this game go online for $100 or more usually, which I definitely don't recommend paying for it. On the other hand, the Super Famicom version and its sequel can both be found for under $20, and they're just as good, if not better. So if you just can't get enough young girls in miniskirts beating bad guys senseless, then get yourself a little Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon action. It's the prettiest damn beat 'em up ever made.